All right, here we are. Two more weeks left in the season. The semifinals are upon us. Before we bring our guests in for this week, we need to really initially do I would say, a deep review of the regular season. I think we talked about that quite extensively. There were some questions that we didn't get to last week that I might want to touch on here in terms of regular season. We'll start with perhaps who was the biggest draft bust. I think it's pretty safe to say that Debo Samuel was massive massive draft bust. And really for Wagner, if you look at his team, CeeDee Lamb, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, even DJ Moore, I mean, all pretty good. Debo, real disappointment. That's definitely got to be the biggest draft bust in my book, not an injury division. If we want to talk injuries, then we really can get into that in greater detail. But we'll just sort of start there. We will let our guests in, two of our semifinalists. In fact, an entire matchup is going to be joining us here this evening. We'll see. Oh, here we go. Slowly, people are populating, and we've got how many New Yorkers do we have today? I guess that's the question we'll go with. All right, welcome. We'll just throw you right into the deep end. Jonathan LaMagna, who's going to win?
Well, I'll defer to the higher seed first. So, what do you think?
Off the bat, my heart says me, but my money is on La Magna. It is hard to pick against somebody who's got a player putting up 40-point plus performances seemingly on the regular right now. And while I think my team does have a tendency to overperform, the chances of me hitting my ceiling are always much more iffy than you get with La Magna. However, I would say the one thing going in my favor is it really depends what this Giants Falcons game looks like, because whatever ends up getting dictated as the play calling scenarios and schemes for that game, that can have a major impact on the kind of points that he gets from the running back position. So I would say it's not crazy if I pull it out, but La Magna's definitely ahead. And I think, no matter what, we can all agree the Mets signing Juan Soto are the real winners, and something we all like to talk about on this Mets pod.
Look, I showed up a little late because I was celebrating Georgetown's first 1-0 start in Big East play in quite some time. I think they won their ninth game overall this year, which matched their total for the entirety of the previous season. It's their first win in the Big East against a team that wasn't DePaul in over 2,000 days in the regular season. So it's been a while, but yeah, let's
Well,
let's let's come off the high of that and then take a look at this matchup. Look, I don't think Josh Allen's going to go for 40 points against New England. I think they're going to be up comfortably and going to be able to have a bit more of a dynamic, a spread it out kind of game. I think James Cook might be able to get some more rushing TDs than he has in the previous game. Uh, so I don't know if that's repeatable. You make a really good point about that Giants Atlanta game. And might I be starting Darnell Mooney with a quarterback that actually has two functional Achilles? We will see, especially with the late injuries to Tracy that might be coming up that might force me to make a pivot in the flex spot. I'd say I do kind of agree that I am the favorite. It is a slight favorite, but when you look at what are the best players in the game, you kind of want to go with the best players. Leans to me, those defenses are going to be really interesting. I'm rolling with the Bills, who have posted negative points and big negative numbers in their past two games. I don't think New England's any good. The Falcons can easily put up 25 against the Giants, and that's going to be something to watch.
I'll say this: I think for La Magna, it's pretty much out of his hands. This is the best lineup he can field, no questions asked. Great bench too, but these are the starts to make. I think on my side, so the factors are more external on my side. I do think the one big factor is will I make the right sit start choices at wide receiver, which with this crop of guys that I have it's been a question mark several times the last few weeks, but it's really up in the air. It used to be that Devonta Smith was the obvious top receiver of my group to start, and then you're kind of figuring, well, Zay Flowers really emerged, and now it's straightforward. And I would say as the way the season's progressed, Elijah Moore aside, because that's just somebody to fill out my roster, these kind of four that I'm sitting with leave me pretty much four guys in the same area, which are a good enough wide receiver two, but really possibly their average puts them in the low two, high three each week. Yet they always break out every now and then. So it's really just will I make the right choices amongst the four of those guys?
It's gonna be interesting. We do this player by player. Both of you have touched on that New York Giants Atlanta Falcons matchup in the dome in Atlanta. Giants run defense has been pretty good the last few weeks. They've held some running backs in check. That will be interesting to see what Bijan's able to do. I think that's a big kind of question mark for LaMagna. I would certainly lean Matt's way. However, if his running backs don't put together some good numbers, it might be tough. We saw what the 49ers pass defense has done recently, despite the offensive struggles. I wouldn't be super thrilled about Tyreek Hill. It's going to be pretty cold this weekend down here in Florida, which we know affects the Dolphins greatly. So keep that in mind. Nico Collins, I would think, would perform on Saturday, and Josh Allen will get his. But I agree with Matt. I can't imagine he's going to have to put up or do something to put up 40. But Jonathan, you've got similar issues. Jawan Jennings has not been great recently. Zay Flowers is boom or bust, and Pittsburgh tends to have the Ravens number. That would concern me a little bit. And at the same time, you could play Devonta Smith, who got in the end zone last week against Washington, where that game could be high scoring against the Eagles. And Khalil Shakir, he's, I mean, they find ways to get him the ball. If he gets one big play touchdown, that really makes him worthwhile. Now, all that aside, James Conner might have a monster day. Hurts could easily get in the end zone a couple times, and it changes things greatly. It's a close matchup. It's tough. I would probably lean Matt because I think the overall talent is a little bit stronger. Maybe the floor is a little higher, but I do have some pretty big question marks with his running backs given those matchups. And we'll see. We'll see which kind of late season moves. Matt's gone the stream tight end route with Brenton Strange here, who's targeted hog, target monster there, number two weapon in Jacksonville, which really might be a deciding factor. But you both hit on the defenses. That could be a big play as well. We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to lean LaMagna on the overall talent, but I think it's pretty close, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the upset. I just think it's it's going to come down to what can happen. The other thing to keep in mind, and this affects, I've got a similar problem in my matchup. There's only one team with one player after the late window on Sunday afternoon. So we go into Sunday Night Football, and Jonathan needs a big Bucky Irving game, and he gets it. That's it. There's no counterpunch for Matt to throw. I've got that same problem, and I think that might be a deciding factor in this as well. But it's two evenly matched teams, and I think for the semis, this is a year where because we had so many teams that were relatively equal competitively in terms of overall strength, we're in a situation now where there's not really overwhelming favorites, which makes it a little bit more intriguing. And I'm certainly curious to see how this one shapes up. Now, perhaps you have thought ahead to week 17. If you get there, do you care who you play?
I'll let you, that's one of those things where my goal this year was to be in a playoff spot or competing for a playoff spot in the last week of this regular season. I traded away my first and second round picks 2 years ago. That pick trade finally came due. It led to a split championship, so I can't really say it was a bad deal, but I sort of knew that this year was going to be a bit of a rebuild. So to be a slight favorite going into the semis it's all gravy. I don't really care about who I'm playing for in the championship. I didn't expect to get this far. So to be in a spot where you, at the very least, you win one of the next two games and you're getting some chunk of money, that's not bad. I guess in theory, I would want to be playing Kirshner, but it's a very weakly held preference here.
I will say I definitely agree with Matt, right? I traded away a couple draft picks to get the championship last season, which again paid off. And I expected this year to just be a throwaway year. Managed to make a couple deals to make it turn into something. Maybe next year will be the throwaway year since I got rid of those picks and prevented the inevitable. But I would say we all think into the future a little bit. And I would say overall, it's definitely Kirshner because the Kirshner's team is a team I look at and go, at least I'm not playing them 3 years ago. I think it's that team that I would genuinely have been afraid of. You would look at them and go, for the most part, with names like this, how are they not putting up 150 points a week in fantasy? But now, again, it's hitting people that to me, yes, can they still pop off at any time? Of course, but the odds are not kind of in the favor of that. And while I would always be afraid of an amazing Lamar Jackson performance that happens or Jamar Chase catching 3 touchdowns, absolutely. It's a star heavy team in a way that doesn't make me nervous in the way that yours does.
Makes me nervous. I'll tell you what, gonna be sweating bullets with this matchup. He's got Mike Evans, who the Buccaneers are doing everything they can to get him to 1,000 yards, which worries me. They're trying to get Jamar Chase the Triple Crown, which he's well ahead in touchdowns. I think he's four touchdowns ahead of the next guy. He's I think 9 catches ahead of the next guy, and he's about 180 or 140 yards ahead of Jefferson. So he's probably going to get the Triple Crown pretty easily. But I do have concerns that he's being just force fed the ball to Higgins' detriment. I do agree with the overall sentiment, though. There is certainly, and this is something I've talked about, I think, a lot this year. My team has a higher floor and maybe a lower ceiling than most, and that was by design. And now is sort of the time where does that pay off? I'm definitely always a little nervous that Barkley or Cook don't get in the end zone, but overall, I do like my matchups. I do like kind of the way that my team is set up here, and I certainly like its overall strength. Certainly selfishly, I think Ravens, they seem to struggle with Pittsburgh. I would expect a low scoring type game. That helps me if Lamar is kept in check, like the Arizona run defense against Hubbard. I don't know that I trust DeAndre Hopkins to do a whole lot, and frankly, I think that Christian definitely is going to be, excuse me, overly dependent on Evans and Chase to have really big performances. At the same time, I think whatever Chase does helps me. With Burrow, I think the Eagles go back to Barkley a lot more than last week. I don't think Washington bottle him up the same way the Steelers could, which will help get him going. They're trying to get him 2,000 yards. Cook, he better get in the end zone this week. That this is an easy matchup, and I hope Pickens plays because if not, I'm not really sure where I go with that sort of flex spot. But yeah, I mean, this is what I prepared for. I mortgage next year. I don't have any picks. They're all gone, basically. Uh, and we'll see. So I certainly would get why I'm favored. I hope I win. I'm not gonna, put any more on it than that. One thing that I think is interesting, next week I already know, kind of looking ahead, that if I were to win, there are certain changes I'm going to make based on matchups. I don't know that I want to play Cincinnati, play Joe Burrow in week 17 based on the matchup. Yeah. So I'm already, not that I'm looking ahead, but I've done the mental calculus of I know that I'm going to have to go with a couple different people if I make it to the final than I'm used to. That said, we had a pretty active waiver wire this morning. Let's all raise our hand if we tried to make 16th round picks for fab dollars to try to secure the top players that we wanted on the waiver wire. We can slowly raise our hands there. I don't think that violates any rules. It certainly may violate the spirit of things. I was rebuffed by an owner who essentially said that they were still mourning the loss of their team last week and that they could not fathom trading Fab. Um, that they could not bring it to themselves to do that. So, you know, we are exhausting all options, I would say, at this point in the year. Welcome to play fantasy cops on that thought or that idea.
Uh,
You know,
I, I'm
I,
I'm going to be a strict constructionist here. Let's see. Yeah, draft picks can be traded at any time before, during, and after the draft into the entire season. However, Article 4, Section C, Subpoint 6, Fab can only be traded between that season's draft and the trade deadline. So you can make
okay,
a pick
well,
for pick swap, but you
Mm.
can't make a pick for Fab swap, which would have been a really, really disaster of an argument to have after waivers ran. but so I think you're lucky that that the person who is in mourning and shall be remain nameless
mhm.
did
Yeah.
not do that.
Thank you, Justice Scalia, for your
That's
strict
right.
textual
That's right.
interpretation.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So, like I said, that idea came to me yesterday, and I went, I don't even know if this is legal. This doesn't feel right, but we might as well, send a text. Obviously, it didn't matter. I think at this point, if you're looking for real help on the waiver wire, you got bigger problems. Um, yeah, I mean, you both have bring up good points in terms of having mortgaged prior years, having won, and now you're sort of sitting here going, "Hey, I didn't think I'd be in this position. Here you are." That's a nice spot to be in. Takes a lot of the maybe pressure or angst off, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. You know,
I mean, when you get
I,
this far, though, you start to now be like, and especially in a position where the run doesn't seem fluky, right? Like,
mhm,
yeah, we put ourselves in a bit of a, disadvantage to come into the year, but there was solid drafting, there was good usage of the waiver wire, and there were some calculated risks on some trades, right? So, when you get to this point, you're like, well, there is a path for me to win. I'd like to see it through.
I would say also starting from the coming to the starting with the perspective of, oh, this year is going to be a waste. I'm just going to have fun and plan for the future. To end up with this result, even if I don't win a playoff game out of it, it's changed the way I perceive fantasy football and strategy in it going forward. Because it's now a reminder of like anything is, well, A, anything is possible. B, I probably don't need to value draft picks potentially in the same way that I currently do. And I can rethink them as a trade chip going forward in both directions. And also I think it's changed the way that I think about how I would choose to whether or not I would want to tank in a season or not, and at what point you make that decision. Because again, I was as late as week 4 or 5, or as early as week 4 or 5, ready to throw in the towel and just trade away whatever I could. And then, okay, you start to look at the schedule and the division I'm in. You say, well, if I'm willing to pay for it, I will make the playoffs, and can I make a run from
mhm.
there? And I ended up, being able to connect on that. So I think it's definitely given me a little bit of a perspective shift.
Yeah, I think Eric's a good case study next year. We go through this almost every year, right? There's almost always one or two teams that have a plethora of first and second round picks. And those teams don't necessarily always make it far. There could be poor drafting. We've seen that before. We've certainly seen injuries. I think it's a good point. No matter what you have from an asset perspective, you've got to hit on the right guys. You've got to make the right decisions, and you need luck along the way too, because you could be the number two scoring team in a week and lose, and you could be the number 11 team and win. So you've got to have some luck, not to speak of injuries as well. So I think it's an interesting point. And Jonathan, you and I have discussed this before on here. Of you were at a unique position of, okay, the only real competition in my division is punting because they've had about as bad of luck as you could have had in the first month of the year. There's just a void here. Why don't I take advantage of it? And I think, as well, everyone values draft picks differently. And I think year to year, you have, that has to be a fluid thing based on what your priority is, right? What are you trying to accomplish? What do you think you can accomplish? I think this year we had teams that were not good, but didn't have anything of value, right? So they kind of get stuck in that position. And conversely, you had teams that said, okay, I've got a good team. Let me just go and get better and whatever that costs, whatever that has to cost in that moment. And now here we are. And I think all three of us in particular were pretty active in those trades. I think of the teams that made the playoffs, we were the ones really pushing in that direction. And clearly it had its benefit. Like I said, I look at next year and I go, oh, that's going to be a doozy. But frankly, you never know because maybe you have the right keepers, maybe you hit on a guy, later round pick or something, you get lucky, whatever it is. I'm never going to say never, but I know I'm probably going to take my lumps next year. And I would imagine all three of us are probably going to have a little bit of struggles based on some of those decisions. And I agree. I think I want to think of draft picks like the NBA, where they're just sort of meaningless paper and you can just trade them all away. But, it's something like that sometimes in fantasy. Is it really that important?
I mean, I
Is it
do think you
really
just
that critical?
a challenge that Paul would be interested to try of can he trade away all of his draft picks?
I mean, I was just as you're going on your explanation, Lowell, I was looking back at the draft board for this year, and I did not realize how many picks Paul had traded away going into this season. I forgot that last year was a I'm going for it kind of year, and he made it to the semis and just fell
Mhm.
short in the semis and in the third place game. So, it's interesting to see his max variance sort of strategy. And then, and I know this was something that we had talked about on some of the suggestions for some of the bigger storylines that didn't pay out. Wagner missing the playoffs is really something that yes, is kind of the luck of the draw of fantasy, and there are certain weird schedule losses that came in, but I think he's gotta feel disappointed when there were, 7 teams for 6 spots and he was the odd one out. And he didn't have a bunch of first round picks, but he had 4 picks in the second round. And if I'm looking at them, let me just pull them up again. Some of them hit, right? So we gave him a bunch of crap for drafting Joe Mixon 2-2. That's probably like one of your best running backs in fantasy, but it was bookended by Josh Jacobs, Debo Samuel, and DJ Moore. And it's just like having those extra picks in the top round minimizes your chance of one entire round being a landmine, but it doesn't make it zero. And that's something that you get a little too top heavy and it sort of leaves you handcuffed in a way.
Yeah, I was looking at that before we started of, thinking of what's the biggest non-injury draft bust. And I think it's Debo. I saw a statistic today. Last year, McCaffrey, Debo, and Ayuk combined for 40 touchdowns. This year they combined for 2. They, which is just astonishing. I think that's by far the biggest draft bust.
I mean,
Certainly non-injury division. I think ETN has not been good.
Yeah.
But Pacheco missed most of the year. But I think for guys who have played basically all year, I think Devo is probably my pick. Look, I think for Wagner, he hit on CeeDee Lamb, he hit on Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon. DJ Moore had some good weeks, but rookie quarterback. DeAndre Swift had some good weeks. Kyle Pitts being the 5th tight end drafted, and I know I know Laporta was a keeper, but that's a tough one. Um,
I
Christian
would
Kirk, I mean, Wagner had a lot of misses once he, got out of the that early part, and I think he paid the price. He just never had the depth, and he tried to hold on, and it didn't pay off. I do think it's an interesting example of having a lot of picks doesn't doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. Jacobs, I know you wanted to
I was
comment.
going to say, I think in that conversation of the draft bust, I do think Kelsey is another big one for the sole factor of you don't draft him that high, assuming he's going to be what the seventh or eighth best tight
Right.
end for fantasy purposes this season, especially when he starts accumulating most of those points after the halfway point in the season. I think solely for that just factor of yes, always taking a tight end this high as a risk, but when his upside as the best tight end was made him as compelling a candidate as any wide receiver, to have him go in the mid to late second round and just be what he's been is awful, I
I mean,
think.
I'd also say too, one of our esteemed panelists right here drafted Mazda Marv 110. Uh, and I don't think he's coming anywhere close to your starting lineup in either this week or next week. And in terms of, non-injury pick value, I mean, that's a tough one to swallow. But then again, you're kind of the overwhelming favorite here. So, you know,
Well, I mean,
you're
look,
allowed
that
to
that
get some busted.
I think that yeah, I mean, certainly, Mazda Marv has been a disappointment. I will say that look, he wasn't. The receiver board was so skewed because of how many receiver keepers there were.
Right.
And so after AJ Brown, there was this big chasm of, well, do you believe in a healthy Cooper Cup? Do you want to believe in you know Drake London? Like, where do you go? And so it was tough, knowing who to take, which receiver. I mean, obviously I could have taken Pacheco or Mixon, and it looks very different from a overall, even probably even better than it my team is. But yeah, Harrison's definitely, I think, up there. I think he's a top 30 receiver. I don't think Debo. I am curious where he stacks up, but Debo is number 48 on the year at the receiver position. Harrison's 29th. So yes, both have been busts, but one definitely is significantly worse than the other. I think that's fair to say. But I mean, look, that's unfortunately part of how this goes. I mean, look, we could talk about Jonathan Taylor, right? He's checks in at running back 27, right? He's been healthy pretty much the whole year. He's behind J.K. Dobbins, who hasn't played about a month, right? So there's a lot of options there, I think. Certainly, I think for Wagner, if he hits on that spot, right? If he picks, I don't even know, like a Malik Neighbors, let's just say, that would have been a reach, right? Or even a James Cook or something. His team looks incredibly different, but that's kind of how that, unfortunately, shakes out. I know it's so hard at this point. We try to look like fantasy pros and see, okay, what are the odds, right? Well, it's still giving signing percentages to Joe and Bonson, obviously that are no longer left alive, and it ranks them, in terms of your power rankings, things like that. I do think, I don't know, at this point in the year, I think some of the odds are a little relevant because it's just one week, one game, you just got to win to continue. We had a lot of movement this year within the league. Are there particular moves, whether it's waiver wire, whether it's trades that you think have, particularly been good or bad, not necessarily involving your team? So, I do think, I look back on, I traded Devontae Adams for George Pickens right at the deadline there, try to diversify my team, and now Devontae Adams has really decided to come alive here. That one I regret a little bit. That might have been nice myself, but anything that stands out on some of the transactions that you maybe either one of you paid attention to or noticed or were involved in yourselves that have either gone really well or conversely gone pretty poorly.
I'll talk about myself while I rack my brain to remember what everybody else did, but I will say two things. One, obviously, is the day I made the trades for James Conner and Brees. That sole move moves me from meh to, well, he's going to be in the playoffs, so I have to consider him a something. So that I would say what I think was a second round pick for Brees and a third round pick for Connor. The real question I am facing right now is, will I have just gotten faced with an injury potentially and Brees Hall at the wrong time? I'm so glad I had the bye as a week to continue to kind of wait to let that situation play out. Would I say I overpaid? I would say, in a perfect world, maybe. I would have loved to get a pair of threes away for that instead of a two and a three, but I think a two and a three for their backgrounds at that point in the season was good. But to the flip side of the last topic, I think me getting Bucky Irving in the 14th round of the draft and basically having him show up in 3 or 4 consecutive weeks when I really needed him and put up, I think, 20-point performances or 16-point performances plus in each was huge. And that, I rode a 7-game win streak into the playoffs, and having him on tap to help me do that was massive.
Yeah,
Yeah, that definitely was a big one. The Bucky Irvin draft pick, that was our league has become very popular, very very interested in these late round rookie draft picks, and that one, finally one of those really paid off in a big way. And yeah, that definitely was huge, huge for you.
yeah, and I would even say on my end, making the the pickup of Tracy in October after Paul churned through him. That's sort of the downside of the rookie running back game is that if you're going to make your identity, I'm going to, use all these rookie running backs as lottery tickets, and then you think this one didn't hit. Let me try again. Let me try again. Let me try again. I pick them up before before that week 5 game against Seattle. He takes a job from Singletary, and then it's been, a bit of choppy waters, but he's gotten enough performances to at least be, an interesting flex guy, especially when we've had the injuries to Walker or Brian Robinson or uh, Tyreek Hill being unplayable because of they were running with Skylar Thompson and Scoop Huntley. So to that point, having a good flex who could get you a baseline of 13 or so points, that was probably my most impactful move outside of the obvious ones, which was the Bijan trade.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, I think the best trade that anyone made this year was Rashad White and Kate Otten for Romeo Doubs and a fourth round pick. I mean, honestly, just that trade moved the needle tremendously and really helped one team not make the playoffs. So I think we have to remember that the last trade before the deadline was really the most impactful and the best one. No, I look it. Jokes aside, for someone who's probably not getting a lot of sleep at the moment, there have been some good moves. Some big moves that have paid off, and I don't think any of mine have been tremendous, but I do think you each have had some really nice transaction moves that have done a lot. I was hoping picking up Sincere McCormick the other week would have been a nice little addition to the bench for the run in here, and then he got hurt. So, try to do the same now with Kendra Miller. But you try to find whatever you can, any gem you can. Um, Looking back, did I need to make a trade for Christian McCaffrey and Jaden Daniels? Probably not. I think I regret more moves than I think really paid off. But because usually I look at my team and I see lots of moves. I see, oh my God, I didn't start with half these players. This year, I really, most of my team I've had the whole year, which has been pretty remarkable. I did pick up the Vikings, I think, after week 1. That's been a really nice addition. They were the number 1 defense for a long time. I think now they're number 2, but that's been a big boost. That's probably my best pickup myself.
I
You
do
know,
think it's given the nature of the trade season we have. I think we have to revisit the Chicago Bears defense trade. As I still to this, I don't understand logic, right? This is one team that primarily scored their defensive points with that 2 touchdown performance to open the season, and even looking ahead, they have a terrible schedule for the fantasy playoffs. I think they're playing well, they just played Minnesota, but I think they've got Detroit and somebody else coming up in the 2 weeks to close it out. What asset, what were they bringing to the table is what I would love to know from the owner in question.
But that trade was made November 7th, so it was in
Mhm.
advance of the New England game. where the Chicago Bears lost 19-3 and recorded 2.24 fantasy points. So, so, I mean, I get the idea of trying to, you know, snipe the Drake May game. It just did not
But is
work
it, I would
out.
say, is it when at that point when Boston was so far ahead in that division, what's the, I guess it's risk reward. Is it worth it? Is that
It's
the,
trying to put,
I
yeah, it's
guess,
like moving from going back 3 rounds in the draft to try and get a bye by banking a win with
okay,
that team. And, you know, let's go to week 10. Well, he won the game. So, and he would have won the game had he had whatever other defense because he was going against, yeah, going against Eric who was tanking. So I really have no idea. Speaking of not having an idea on anything, that trade that you and I made, Lowell, for Kareem Hunt, it is just a masterclass in me uh, selling a bit too early and not really knowing whether I was in or out. And I'm trying to straddle the line on both. And I think the initial deal that we had agreed on was like Hunt for a seventh. But then I think because you threw in Cole Kmet and I needed a tight end and I was kind of sort of still playing out the season, it dropped down to an 11th round pick. And I'm like, well, at the end of the day, I did need Kmet for that win. That win got me into the playoffs. At the end of the day, it sort of worked out. On the other hand, if I waited another week, I probably could have got a fifth for Kareem Hunt. So that's the one that I'm thinking about a little more. Did I cut bait a little too early?
I think that one was tough, right? Was Hunt definitely had some good weeks. I didn't play him a ton, but usually when I played him, he did well. And it was one of those. It's like, look, you're not getting a stud, you're getting a depth piece, but a piece that is helpful, for bye weeks and injuries and matchups. And look, Kareem Hunt has not been explosive, but when he was getting 20, 25 touches a game and falling into the end zone, it's sort of like, what are you doing? Of course, you're going to want that on your team. And I know, later in the year, I sort of tried to trade him back to you, and you were not interested, and I think for the right reasons at that point. But yeah, I think hindsight there maybe. It's hard because you really have to dissect, would I have started them in this matchup? Would that have changed the outcome? Is that matter? I think this is a year that's unique because everybody was so close in terms of record going into the last week. And so you can look at it and go, whoa, if I had one more win, right, or two more wins, now I'm a different seed. And what does that mean? You can play that what if game, but at that point, you really can't do anything about it. So don't know that it's useful. I do agree. I think in that moment, you kind of thought, hey, if I hold on to him, maybe he gets better. Cole Kmet, though, involved in multiple trades this year. Really prime asset, as we know, right? Big market for Cole Kmet, particularly after that. What is it? 2 weeks in a row, he had like huge numbers, and then has done nothing. I think nothing in the last 2.5 months. So I look forward to him being a keeper, for next year for someone. Yeah, I think looking back at trades, there's a lot that you kind of chuckle at now, and some that you go, yep, those are head scratchers in the moment, probably still are. In terms of compensation, though, I don't think, it's so interesting because sometimes I see trades come, get people agree on a trade, and I go, I don't even know who won, who lost. I don't know how you came up with this as the compensation. I think what it proves is that everybody has a different value that they assign to players to picks. What type of pick? How do we negotiate that? You know, I know for me, because of the strength of my team, trying to leverage. Well, look, if you take an eighth round pick is basically a seventh round pick, and you try to convince someone of that math, um, I think most of the time it doesn't work. But in your own head, you go, well, what's the difference of one or two spots, right? Basically nothing. At that point, you're more or less throwing the dice anyway. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of that goes into it as well. Of how can what's your value versus the other person? So we've been doing this long enough. I mean, I think you kind of get a sense of who likes to make trades, what kind of trades people like to do, when they like to make trades. Joe basically doesn't make trades. Bodson might make a trade. Paul can't stop making trades. You know, you kind of go like, what? You kind of got to know your I don't want to say enemy, right? But you got to know your adversary there, and recognize that. I think I enjoy that part of it now, where we're a decade plus into this, and there's a lot of continuity, and there's a lot of over time. People have gotten better. People's strategies have changed. People are now approach things in a more strategic and long term way. It makes it a little more exciting, a little more interesting. Well, I think it's also helped the competitive level has gone up year after, year over year, right? We're now in a position where we really didn't never see one dominant team anymore. We see a lot of competitive balance. And I'll be curious in 5 years, what do the Jacobs power rankings say, right? If we were to just, let's say we slice it, from, I don't know, 2022 or 2023 forward, what is that going to look like compared to the first, let's say 8 years of the league? What is the second?
Joe Richmond is still going to be on
Yeah,
top.
I'm sure he is, but I do think I'd be curious, right? Is there a difference? Are the gaps different? Not that we're too into that now, but um, yeah, I mean, those are the kind of things that that run through my mind sometimes, thinking about the league as a whole and even within individual seasons as well.
Mm. It's the lead into that point was talking about the trades that we made. I think this is something that we should have listeners submit in advance next time is the trade you're so glad you didn't make and looking back on the trade that didn't happen because I'm thinking I was just thumbing through those and I think about three different times during the season Paul and I were negotiating over Xavier Worthy and I was at one point fifth round pick was being discussed a lot of things that you kind of look at and go, well, that was, wow, I really valued that player differently at that point in the season based on that evidence. And 2020 is hindsight, but it's the season that could have been.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's every week. That's every season. What could have been, you know?
yeah, I think that's right. I'm just looking through what are the various permutations and combinations of Paul trades
Oh, I
that
was,
that
I believe I was offered TJ Hawkinson along with several mid to late round picks for Bucky Irving and a first round pick. I just looked at that and wow, that's actually very funny. I appreciate the comedy to that.
So here's what I think is appreciating the comedy of things. And you want to talk about the trade you wish you didn't make or you're happy you did not make. There was a very long time where I've had Bills and the Broncos defense, and they were like 1-2, and obviously you can't have both. And I had made the decision in my mind that Bills had a better schedule for the back half of the season, fantasy playoffs. I need to get rid of the Broncos. I have to get something for the Broncos. Bills and the Broncos. And so it's like, if someone, someone, please, I'll take a 10th round pick. I'll take an 11th round pick for the Denver Broncos defense. And then Denver just puts up 25 in that playoff game is a key reason why, even with the bit of the rally from Richmond on Monday Night Football, the game wasn't even close. So the amount of times that I kept on saying, someone please, will someone please rid me of this Denver Broncos defense? And no one did it. And it's the reason I'm still in the game because had I had to start the Bills DST, so take away the 23 points that I have. It was 121 versus 99. So, all right, I'm at 97 points. Clearly, I can just get 3 points from the Bills DSC. No, -4. So that's the one where I'm like, no one took me up on that Broncos DST. They should have, but I'm happy that no one did.
Yeah, I mean, look, I look back to the trades that came through, and there were a lot that involved Deontay Johnson. I'm glad I passed on every one of those. I look back and I go, this was the very beginning of the year. This is only a couple of weeks in. I offered Rico Dowdle, Cortland Sutton, Jaden Reed, and a sixth round pick for Brees Hall and Brandon Ayuk. I wonder if the manager who received that offer has any regrets there. Their season very well may have turned out differently had they done something like that. Yeah, I mean, look, it's the same thing for anything else, right? There's those sliding door moments. Should if I had done this or not done this, what else happens? What's the butterfly effect? Um, yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm just glad I passed on Deontay Johnson on the 35 million times that he was offered to me. And probably be offered to me again next season. I'm, every day, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. But I think it makes it fun, right? For as much as we joke around and we make fun of each other for the ridiculous trades and for the weird or the dumb things that we do, or say or what have you, that helps, right? I know that we may differ on who's the best guy in the league, right? Is it the commissioner or is it the commissioner, right? Who's the best guy in the group? Ultimately, at the end of the day, is this is all about fun. I know I've said it before. Like one of the things that I'm so happy about is this league has created friendships. It's fostered friendships. It's furthered, friendships and brotherhood amongst a great group of people. And every year it's made the best team win, the best person win. And we're gonna have a lot of fun along the way. We haven't had too many controversies last couple of years. Thankful for that. I'm always happy to adjudicate more with a firm hand. Yeah, I mean, look, we'll wrap this one up. I'm sure Matt's got to get some sleep before the next feeding. You know, I wouldn't say we've all been there, but I've been there. Um, you know, you're both, I'm sure, going to hope or certainly pick that you think you're going to win. What's the, has there been a lesson that you've learned this year? We're not going to, about fantasy, about how to play this game that maybe you didn't have or now that you're going to take with you going forward? Anything that's a lasting thought or lesson that you've learned? I know, Jacobs, you talked about how you've changed your assessment and value that you place on draft picks when it comes to trading. I think that's a very good development, right? It changes your perspective. It changes how you approach those different transactions. Anything like that stand out for you, Matt?
Yeah, I think the main thing is at this point we've been playing this league out for 10 years, and you adopt different draft strategies or different team composition strategies over time. And I think the important thing is never get locked into one strategy. I was always the person that was wait on make your last three picks, quarterback, defense, kicker, and go from there. This year I picked Josh Allen, and it's the reason that I'm, one step away from making it to the championship game. So things like that are the important things to know when you can zig instead of zag.
I think that's a good point. I think it's every year you have to approach it new perspective, new strategy. You can't always play the same way. It's just it doesn't work out that well, right? I think that's a really good spot. Well, hopefully next week, I would assume next week we're gonna or one of you will be invited on. If you lose, we no longer care about you. That's just how this works, right? It's kind of like the Yankees. They lost. Nobody cares about them again. We don't even talk about them until they win, which will never happen again, right? Right, Jacobs? Yankees
That's
are
the dream. It's not even
there. You
about
go.
the Mets winning, actually. It is specifically about the Yankees.
But
One last
if
thing
they can,
before we go.
all right.
Um, Speaking of things that don't matter because they've lost, 20 seconds or less, who's winning the consolation bracket in the number one pick?
I mean, look, we've avoided talking about that in the entire pod. We're you know,
If anyone's still listening to this, they deserve the sicko's 20-second prediction.
this is very much sicko mode. I mean, look, it has to be Wagner. Like there's not a comparable team in terms of like strength, right? And I have to think he's going to beat Paul. But like, don't know. If it's not Wagner, I think it'll be hilarious because there's such a gulf between the teams. But man, what's the funniest outcome? Is the funniest outcome Paul or is the funniest outcome Drew or Manning? Because to me, like I think we kind of know what's going to happen, or we think we know what's going to happen. So like, what's the most comedic result here? And I almost just want to say it's Manning because I just want to say
I,
like we give Manny the number one pick. Brandon Oliver might be the number one pick next year. Like we get to make those jokes for the next like 8 months. That's what I want.
I actually think Emmanuel's going to win because he has Kyron, Puka, Brian Thomas, who's now going to get a billion targets in Jacksonville. If Pollard is healthy, I think he's going to win.
And I would actually agree. I was going to call this bracket for Manny as well. I think his team is deceptive in what their performance is versus what their potential is. And even within my shitty division, that was the one matchup in those last 3 weeks where I thought I might lose. It ended up being incredibly close. But I think that team's much better than its record and points for indicate.
Well, I agree that it's deceptive, but that doesn't mean that we don't get to then speculate wildly about what the number one pick will be.
That's
I
right.
mean, remember, half of this is just for laughs and fun. And that to me is the ultimate outcome. Is Manny has the number one pick. And then the question is Manny going to show up at the draft? Is he going to remember that he has the number one pick? I mean, again, we
This
get to
has to
ask these
happen.
questions.
It has to
Is he going to
happen.
can invite some random person no one's ever met before, to make the pick for him? Like, there's a million ways that we got a lot more content out of that one. Look, um, I hope for Catherine's sake she gets the number one pick. She's a new mom. We need new mom energy for the draft next year. No, like it's. I agree with you. I think Manny's got a deceptive team, but uh, I don't trust the Rams. I don't. I don't know that I trust the Rams. The NFC West. I don't trust anybody who's relying on a team playing another NFC West division rival in a key matchup. I don't trust that. There's some weird stuff that goes on in that division. It's a bunch of poop. But I'm rooting for Manny because man, oh man, I'm here for the most ridiculous outcome. And that will, there's a podcast I listen to, and one of the principles, wouldn't that be hilarious? And Manny winning the consolation bracket over Wagner, wouldn't that be hilarious? So I'll hang up on that one, gentlemen. Thank you for your time this evening. Jacobs, you still got a number of hours before the calendar turns to tomorrow. Matt, you and I, we got.
We know what we're in for.
Yeah, well, I'm not in for that.
Me
You are,
neither.
hopefully. I
She's
know you.
she's sleeping through the night now, so
That
we're
isn't that is a changer, life changer. So best of luck to both of you, and we'll see. May the better men Schmidt win. I don't know. I'm just excited. We got football on Saturday, then on a Wednesday,
all sorts of football.
all sorts of football. It's a great time to be alive.
Christmas
All right,
miracle.
All right,
yeah.
take
You
care,
know what?
everyone.
It's going to be some kind of miracle if Netflix pulls this off without crashing next week. That's for sure.
That's
We're
right.
gonna. I don't even want. I don't want to know what the Vegas odds are on the Netflix servers going down at kickoff. Um, I'm excited for everybody freaking out and relying on Twitter for live updates of an NFL game. That'd be
At
nice.
least
So
I live
anyway,
in the Baltimore area, so I'll get that over the air. So that'll be okay.
oh, I guess they still have to do that, don't they?
They still have to put it over the air for local broadcasts. So I'll be able to watch 1.5 of the games.
There you go, 1.5. Look, that's all that matters, right?
That's right.
So
That's the amount of games you want to watch.
I'll take it. I'm not sure I get to watch 1.5 in a week, so I'll
That's
take
right.
it. All right, gents.
All
Again,
right.
best of luck, and
Same here.
we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
See
You
one of us next week.
know, yes.